for those of you joining us on episode one here, Rodney and I recorded an episode zero for a lovely intro that you hopefully saw if you're watching or listening to this. Um, but it took me 2 weeks to get it in. Although to be fair, it didn't really take me 2 weeks. So one of the nice things about living on the East Coast, especially this part of the East Coast, is I have gigabit internet
Yeah,
uh,
that's nice.
at my house. And so I hadn't checked on it in a while. And I've been having issues lately where I was on a call one day, not like a couple of weeks ago, and while I was on the call, like it was degrading. So like the connection was getting worse and worse and worse. And then I ended the call and couldn't rejoin it. And in fact, then suddenly lost all network connectivity.
Mm.
And I went and had to reboot the router. But then it was fine. Right. So it's a Gabe problem, not an internet service provider problem.
But it wasn't the 60-second video you were trying to upload problem, right?
Well,
Oh, but that was like an hour.
so
Yeah.
that's what set me off. It's because I was trying to do it and it kept failing. And I was like, this is ludicrous that I can't like I know it's a big file, but like
Yeah.
um and uh and so then I started doing some speed test stuff and it was real low. So then I basically like it was coming in. So I think in reality, even though I'm playing for gigabit, like it comes in most of the time between 250 and 600
Yeah.
somewhere in there, which
Right.
is like way more than I
Totally
need
sound.
anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and when we bought this house, before we moved in, I dropped a bunch of Ethernet cord, made some
Yeah.
holes and stuff, and dropped it. So it's very much amateur hour in terms of dropping stuff in, if that makes sense. Like there's
Yeah.
like a hole in the floor over to
Sure.
the side,
Yeah.
right? Like kind of thing. And so it's a pain in the butt to pull anything up and down there. But so
Mm.
then I started checking cables and I was like, I feel like my main cable, like from the point of access into the house into my primary router, didn't seem good. Swap that out. It bumped it up like 5x out the gate. So
Really?
suddenly, yeah,
How's the cable go bad?
man, I don't know. We had, well, I mean, so we get occasionally some real bad thunder and lightning out here, like we did
Yeah.
in Illinois, yeah, I assume we still do. And like one time, lightning hit. I'm looking out the window because I can see where it hit. It was about 50 feet away,
Yeah.
and it fried about a third of the ports on a very large Ethernet switch that I have. It has 16 ports on it,
Yep.
and
Got
it fried like six of them. No idea why, right? And just six, didn't blow out any cables. So there's always stuff like that. I
it.
don't
Right.
know. I don't know why the cable wouldn't just stop working and why it would be just not as good.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So I went out. Do you know what? So Ethernet cable, like the standby Cat 5. Those
Yep.
are, do you know
Yeah.
do you know what they're up to now?
The last, so I put that cable in my house
Uh-huh.
based on your recommendation. You told me to do this when I remodeled this house. And I think I put in Cat 6.
Hmm.
If I remember right, Cat 7 was available, but I was too cheap to buy it because there was something about it. I can't remember.
So Cat 6 is good.
Yeah,
That
right.
comfortably covers you with the gigabyte internet.
Exactly.
I went with Cat 8 this
Okay.
time, which handles like let me be I can't it's like so to be clear, it is useless. Like
Right.
it is way
Totally
overkill.
overkill.
It's like I think it's like 60 gigabytes or something it can handle.
Like internet you couldn't even get.
Oh, not even internet I can't get. I can't transfer stuff that fast between things in my
Yeah,
house.
that's right. That's right.
Um it's like for high-speed data center stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't that much more expensive. Like I'm not buying a mile of cable.
Right.
And so it was I think for a 50-foot cable, it was like $5 more.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Then that's fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember it. I remember the like jump from 6 to 7 being like double for mine. So like it just wasn't worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the prices are much more flat now. If you go to monoprice.com,
There we go.
that's right. That's where
Probably
I
a
get all my
sponsor.
cables.
They'll probably be a sponsor.
I don't know. They're pretty focused on price. I gotta imagine they're not sponsoring anything.
Yeah. Not probably not as focused on ag either.
Yeah. But if you need to buy cables, that's where I would get them.
Okay,
They've
good to
always been
know.
pretty reliable. But it took, I don't know, I didn't pay for any fast shipping or anything. So it took like, so once I figured that out, then it took a while for stuff to get out here. And then, so I still have to, so now I'm going to go through the hassle of replacing all the main, kind of the main line. I've
Oh
got
wow.
like a prime, so I run a mesh network. So I've
Yep.
got my primary router and then two others that it's hardwired into, and as well as three different switches
Okay.
in between all that.
Yeah,
Um,
you could be my IT guy for sure. I don't have a setup nearly that complicated.
when I was at Cargill, the IT guys used to make fun of me for running a more complicated network than Cargill had, which is 100% accurate.
Yeah. Do you host like LAN parties or anything like that? You don't, right?
No,
Yeah.
no, I really, you know what it is? It's leftover biases from, I mean, Wi-Fi is obviously pretty good these days.
Mm,
But when, even, I don't know, 8 years ago, I wouldn't have relied on Wi-Fi through the whole house.
right.
And when you're playing video games or streaming video, it is nicer. It's more reliable to have just the hardline connection.
Yeah.
'Cause otherwise, at least in my house, when somebody runs the microwave, like anything that's over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth gets a little
Yeah.
swirly.
That's crazy, man. So I put in all that cable based on your recommendation. Never hooked anything up to anything. It is literally all Wi-Fi at this house
Or
from one unit in the basement. I do have a mesh system, so it separates it out a little bit.
you don't have your mesh access points back wired backhaul to the prime. Oh man, that would drive me insane, Rodney.
Yeah, I don't think I can with the setup I have.
What? I mean, all right. If I'm ever
I'll
in
check.
Dwight, I'm
But
coming over to
hey,
your house.
I will check on that because I did it right. You gave me the right advice, and then I just never actually hooked it up. I just never did it. So
Mm.
yeah, I think mine are like repeaters. They're just
Even if they are, generally you can. I mean, look and see if there's an Ethernet jack on the back of them,
mm,
and if there is, then you can hook it
yeah. I'll
up.
have to check. I never
I mean,
even considered that.
look, if everything's working for you, don't screw with it.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But man, when Netflix goes down in this house, I got a few girls screaming at me, so I got to keep it running. It's like they always say China, it was really important for China to feed their people because the way you like that, they'll do anything to make sure they have a good food supply to stay in power. That's me, only internet in my house. I have the same strategy.
As long as that's up and running, you're
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah, I'm good. Yeah, stay in power. I have no power.
How are things in Illinois this week?
Illinois is good, man. Planting season in full effect. We've been actually our farm, we just started Saturday here, so it's Wednesday, so we just started a few days ago. And yeah, things are looking good. Guys are making a lot of progress, getting a little rain today, so feeling really good, you know.
Feel okay, even though
I
it's
you,
raining.
so it's funny. Uh Spring weather conditions are dicey, right? So they'll
Hmm.
be like, oh, it can't rain. We definitely don't want it to rain until this day, then we definitely want it to rain, like
Right.
almost hour by hour. But most guys, what I hear from guys is ground's working up really good. Um, they don't really like to plant the whole crop in 7 days. A lot of these guys are geared up. They could plant the whole crop in
Uh-huh.
7 days. Um, they don't like to do that. They don't like purposely delay. If it was fully sunny and everything was good, guys would accidentally plant their crop in 7 days or 14 days or whatever. But the rain when it rolls through, it kind of slows them down a little bit. And I think generally everybody thinks that's kind of a good thing.
Yeah. How much? I mean, so if I think about something like that, like to actually do it in 7 days, your plan has to be perfect, right? Like if
Uh, Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it depends. Like when I say 7 days, that's probably
I know,
a little bit of a stretch. But yeah, I mean, what I've seen here as of late is guys have, for the most part, equipment to farm way more acres
mm,
than they have, right? And it's just like equipment's just generally gotten bigger, and when you upgrade, you're just getting bigger stuff. So, I remember when 24 row planters came out and it was like, oh man, like 24 row planters, right?
What are they now?
Now, like a lot of guys have two 24 row planters. They like run an extra one to plant beans. We don't have anything that big, and not everybody does, but like pretty much a 16 row planter these days, it's kind of table stakes for a lot of folks, and
Yeah.
that did not used to be the case. Plus auto steer, right? You think about, Dad always talked about back in the day, he'd have an open cab. He's like, yeah, we didn't used to plant corn in April because it was like 50 degrees, right? Like, why would I do that? So now it's all, obviously climate controlled and all that. But the really game changer, I think, for speed is you're not turned around looking behind you like
Make sure you're straight.
watching if you're planting, right? Like that's really hard on your body. And now with auto steer, I mean, they can do it pretty much all day.
And so how far away are we from fully automated planting?
I think guys are doing it. I mean, I'm sure there are guys throwing toolboxes on the seat and walking away. I'm sure of that. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's funny. You would think that it's safer to have a tractor be fully automated than like a car.
Sure.
The thing about a tractor is it's like 800 horsepower and weighs, God knows how much. Like I think a lot about, man, what if it just broke and just drove it like nothing would stop it?
Hmm.
It would drive through houses if it needed to. So I don't know. Yeah, like I said, I think we're there.
Yeah. Y- Okay.
Especially if you think about it from like more like a remote control standpoint. I think that is super reasonable, you know.
I I was talking to somebody who was sharing a story with me about somebody they worked with that was using drones. I don't know what for, like out in the field to look at fields or whatever. And they had three super pricey drones that they lost in the same day. And so it was like a tragedy or comedic tragedy, right? So talking about, you think it would be safer to run a tractor because the implication being there's not a lot of, it's easy enough to keep, don't go walk in front of
Yeah,
the
right. Yeah,
tractor.
exactly. You got a half a mile to correct your problem.
Right, it's
Yeah.
not cruising down the streets of San Francisco. So
Yeah.
um but the first they lost two because they flew into each other.
Oh,
It's like I don't even know, like,
like the odds.
what happened. Yeah, I mean, and there had to be something in the code that was so deliberate that sent them to the same place or
Right.
something.
Right.
And then the other one like flew into a barn or something. Like it was just but it was like 70 grand of drones out the
Oh,
door.
that's unbelievable. Not to mention the downtime, right? Like, I mean, I
That,
assume they're using them to make money,
yeah.
right? It's a commercial. Yeah.
Well, that was the interesting context that we're talking about it in, because there's a whole, it feels like there's a, not a whole, I was gonna say a whole bunch, there's not a whole bunch, but there's different technologies now like drones that let you look at your field from the sky as opposed to having to try to walk through it, and it's a lot easier to tell certain things that way. And especially if you're getting the drone footage, dump it into a computer, it can tell you, how uniform is your emergence and things like
Yep.
that.
Right.
But the challenge is, like, do you really get that right to understand it at the points you need it? Like there's like a day, right? Or maybe
Yeah.
3 days that it's useful for. And it's probably a similar time to everybody else.
Yeah.
And yeah, the logistics around it are tough. If you're not just doing it yourself. And you're competing against a better and better set of satellite images every day.
Yeah. Right.
And when the weather's struggling, which is going to stop your satellite, it may also be stopping your drone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. 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 And those satellites, for the most part, are daily, right? Do they get a daily
It,
coverage?
mean, yeah, and so North America, like within the zone, it's roughly daily.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cloud cover is
Yeah.
probably your biggest enemy.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But the
Yeah, dude, drones were a hot item 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So I don't know. I don't see them much anymore. I don't hear about them much anymore.
Well, it's that hype curve, right? So like they
Yeah.
they hit the peak, they've come back down, and so they're starting to find real commercial usefulness. But I think they're still working on it, right? Like, I don't think they've got good setups for recharging in the field.
Sure.
There's a group actually out here that builds like mini school bus sized drones for spraying and stuff that can
Yeah.
run for a way longer period of time
Sure.
and have
Right.
bigger payload capacity. So I think some of that stuff is getting figured out, but I think it will struggle if you're not able to run it yourself and it's not affordable enough for you to have your own. I think it kind of what got me thinking about it was when you're talking about everybody has more machinery than they need.
Yeah.
Because it's like if you and I are farming next to each other and we get along and we can share the machines, it's probably way more efficient, right?
Yeah.
But the frequency that you and I are going to agree on how to, maintenance or whatever 100 little decisions that need to get made.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not going to get cranky because you didn't run it last night and I need it this morning. And
Yeah, and not to mention the same problem as you were describing with the drones. Like, hey, when the reason we don't share planners is because we all need planners on the same day,
right,
right?
right.
Um, yeah, although I'll tell you, equipment costs through the roof for farmers right now. So, I met with a banker last week, and we were talking about just farm, returns, and I mentioned him. I'm like, man, I've kind of been away from the cash grain business for
Hmm.
5 years or so when I was at Indigo with you. And, when I walked back into it, it was like suddenly we used to talk about 220 corn, 220 bushel corn when I
Hmm.
left. Now it's like people talk about 250 corn, right? So
Hmm.
there's 30 bushel right there that just
Yeah.
like,
People must be loaded.
yeah. Now they got more inputs and all that for sure. But I was telling this banker, I'm like, man, prices, these corn's like 475 at the time, and I'm like 260 bushel. Like, why are these guys not making money? And he told me, he's like, equipment costs are through the roof. So equipment's gone up when they work on that equipment, so they can't do it themselves anymore. So when
Mm.
it gets worked on, those bills are higher. So equipment and maintenance, big problems for the farm right now. So definitely guys looking at sharing, equipment if possible with those neighbors. I think we'll see more of that.
I I was talking to a startup the other day that was had a service that they wanted to offer farmers, and they're starting in South America, but they're like, yeah, we're gonna come to the US. And so was trying to understand like what does this thing cost? And it boiled down to $50 an acre. And I was like, and it was basically a risk management um for drought stuff. And
Mm,
and I was like, guys, nobody's gonna pay $50 an acre for drought prevention. And they're like, what?
no.
And they're like, well, how do you know that? I was like, well, I haven't looked at the numbers this year, but I feel like things are pretty tight. And then I pulled up Farm Doc and I was like, oh yeah, everybody's losing $60 an acre
Yeah,
this year.
negative, yeah. Yeah, and like the other thing, so okay, we're protecting against drought. I mean, the farmer doesn't really care about bushels. He cares about revenue. You can spend much less than $50 on an insurance policy that would, give you way better
Yeah,
coverage.
yeah,
So,
um, yeah. It's interesting. I've also been doing some work on the input side.
okay.
That's been uh, so so. Despite all my time in ag, very little of it has been in inputs.
Yeah, same.
We used to do some stuff where when I was at Cargill, we would wrap some risk management into input pricing. So if the market went lower, you'd get an additional rebate, on your fertilizer costs or whatever it was.
Hmm.
But Cargill in the US never a huge player
Yeah.
on the input side. Bigger in Canada, so we did a little more there.
Hmm.
But understanding the rebate structures that work for the retailers.
Yeah, I know just enough of that. I worked at a co-op for a while,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah, sure.
like I was on, I never got the rebates personally because I was on the grain side, but I
Uh-huh.
know this thing exists. Yeah, tell me about it.
Well, so if but you were at was it a Growmark or
Yeah,
the
Grain Co. FS.
Granco under? Yeah. So the guy who I've been mostly working with, who I think we'll have on at one point, although he actually wants to talk about cattle, not inputs.
Hmm.
Um, Nate Brabitz is a
Hmm.
longtime
Yeah,
friend. And we worked together back in the day at Cargill. And so we were just walking through like the challenge that the retailers face is all the manufacturers give them these different goals. It's kind of like when you're a sales guy and they're like, okay, you need to hit this as your threshold.
sure.
But what's interesting is the goals are set up as binary. So
Hmm.
you have to do at least $100,000 a product this year, and then if you do that, you get a 2% rebate on everything. But
Okay.
if you don't do 100,000, if you do 999
Yeah,
99,900, you get nothing.
that's a different math problem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and to complicate it, so they're generally, every farmer's a little bit different in terms of what they want. So they're probably working with a couple different manufacturers. So they have a couple different targets they're trying to hit, right? And they want to hit
sure.
all of them. And those
Hmm.
manufacturers and distributors are really good at understanding what that retailer should be capable of. And so it's tight.
So they're fighting for share of wallet with their incentives that they're putting in front of
Totally.
them. Got it.
So the retailer's trying to optimize that level. And then what happens is you get to the end of the season and generally going to, you're returning whatever product you
Hmm.
ordered but didn't sell. And so there's this challenge where because it's so tight, they could be returning something to get $1,000 back, but it pushes them below the threshold. And
Sure.
suddenly, they got $1,000 back on the return, but they lost a $10,000 rebate payment.
Okay.
Um, and and it's complicated because one, I've got these different groups, and the way that everything, it's not just a straight up. It's not, as is often the case, it's not easy to just sit down and go, oh, I bought $100,000 worth of stuff from them this year. Like there's little bits and bobs. So we're trying to figure out a way that, because he's my friend, right? So trying to understand, like, is there a way we can build something that incorporates those rules? And um, but that aside, like, it's been fascinating to like see that part of the industry. um, all the rebates are around premium products, right? So there's
Sure.
not a ton of incentive, or if any, around generic. Um, and the other thing that I'm learning about is how all the patents are going to roll off in the next 3 years, or most of them.
For things like stabilizer and stuff like that, is that what we're talking about? Or
Yeah,
chemicals? All of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's. I don't know about seed, but I think it's like Fert and Chem.
Got
Yeah,
it.
applications of
Yeah.
stuff. And so it it that's got to evolve. If you don't if everything's generic, you can't charge premium prices for it because
Yeah.
you can't really have a differentiated thing. So then what's the next game? um I don't know enough about that space to know where that'll go, but
Yeah.
that was it's been fun learning about that stuff. But as like
Why
you
why are all these things rolling off in a few years?
just because of
Something
the way
magic
patent
happened?
law works, like it's
Oh
just
yeah.
I mean, they roll off over time. It's just, I guess, there's a big chunk of them.
Got it. Hmm.
um, so and
Like 1997 was a big year for
right.
right or something. Yeah.
Exactly. and
Nice.
and and it's hard, if not impossible, to get new treatments
Yeah.
approved, right? Like wholly new stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah, and getting harder. Right.
yeah.
That is an uphill battle for sure.
So yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll just start all selling those robots that go through and shoot all the weeds with lasers. Like,
I saw where did I see that? There's somebody running one of those around here. Like the it's electricity, like it shocks them.
yeah,
That's good, man. It's cool. I like it.
yeah. I mean, it looks really cool. I have no idea. I think it's a lot tougher when you've got corn like actually up
Yeah,
there. I don't know how problematic it is. If you get to July and everything looks good, like they're
right.
probably okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Um, but yeah. What about so if they're in them so if your customers are focused on planting right now, when
Yeah.
did that really kick off?
So, most guys like kind of April 15th feels like the day that kind of most people want to run. There definitely was some soybeans planted in March around here, late March.
Love the climate change, baby.
Yeah, definitely. There's some guys going hard after. I think the crop insurance date's like April 5th where I'm from. So like you
Okay. Can't plant
technically
before then.
plant anything before April 5th. Um, Most guys, I think all guys would pretty much stick to that on corn, soybeans. So we could talk about soybeans. There's some crazy things going on there. But yeah, April 15th tends to be the window. We had a little bit of rain, a little bit of cooler weather. Um, the soil temperature has been a little colder than normal, and really guys watch soil temperature really close. So that delayed everybody. Like we weren't able to go on April 20th or whatever, but we weren't, it didn't matter because it was like, nah, ground's still pretty cold or whatever. Plenty of time. And again, back to I think because people have more equipment or are over equipped versus how they were maybe 10 or 20 years ago, they also get less nervous if it's late, right? Like
Sure.
we just are gonna see a window where we get the crop planted.
It takes a pretty significant event to have the planting window impact actual production,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Yeah.
Or a series of events, I guess. You could have something suddenly delayed it by 3 weeks, and it's like, oh, if we hadn't been delayed 3 weeks, then and it's not going to be a 3 week delay. I mean, I don't know what would roll through and
Yeah,
delay
I mean it can
production.
happen. Don't tell a North Dakota guy that there can't be a 3 week
Well,
delay. I mean, but
sure,
it
he's probably still digging the snow off the roof.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the soybean thing, I talked about how I've been gone out of the grain business for a few years, and it's interesting coming back. What's shifted in soybeans. So I think this is an equipment thing as well. Um, Guys used to just plant all the corn. Then when they got done, sometimes they would wait a couple weeks and
Hmm.
then switch to beans, right? They wanted to be warmer. And I think these seed treatments on soybeans or whatever they got going on soybeans have made some major strides. And guys are finding that they can't plant them early enough. Like it just seems like
Really?
every year they're saying, "Hey, hey, we should be." I remember the first time I heard, "Yeah, we got two planters because we want to run corn and beans at the same time," right? I remember just thinking like, "Oh, that's weird."
That sounds weird. It's
Yeah, it's
weird to
not
say
like
you want to plant
like
a lot of
whatever,
corn. Yeah.
right? I mean, where I was from at that time, I would have said, well, if you want to go faster, run two
Two corn
planters
planters.
and corn and then
Yeah.
switch to beans. But now, so again, fast forward 5 years later, it is such a given. Like when I'm talking to farmers and saying like, how's planting going? It's like, well, we got all the beans in. We're, just about ready to start on corn. There's no mention of the fact that that didn't happen, 10 years ago or whatever.
Well, I bet we talked about this a couple years back when we were doing the old podcast, but it when I noticed that they were growing beans in Canada, southern Canada regularly,
Yeah.
that was like that was kind of a like,
Mm.
oh,
Yeah.
because in the early 2000s, like you're saying, when we both started, I beans. So my background is on the risk management side, and so we are always trying to help people put more structure around when they were pricing what, and you couldn't even have a conversation with beans till June.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Guys
um,
would say, I don't even know
I
if
have
I'll
no
have
idea.
it, right?
Yeah,
Until the leaves poke through the ground, they weren't
that
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 sure
was,
that,
yeah, that was exactly
yeah,
it. Yeah, until I see
yeah,
something here, I don't even know if I've got a crop. I'm not talking to you about
yeah,
beans.
yeah,
Um, and I think there was still, and this is probably still somewhat the case. It's more fun to grow corn because it gets bigger.
yeah.
It just is. it,
More
it looks
volume, more
cool.
playing with trucks at the end of the year. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's more fun for sure.
But I think with the competition and everything else, it's harder to justify. But if we take a step back, it's probably not a shocker that beans have caught up from a maturity of stability perspective.
Yeah.
People smarter than us 30 years ago probably would have told us, yeah, this is what it's going to look like in
Yeah, I'm sure
2025.
somebody had
Yeah.
mentioned that. The thing I remember about soybeans back in the day was it seemed like that yield never changed. Like corn yields were kind of exponentially growing from, early in my career till now. And for a long time, beans did not. Again, back in it 5 years later, suddenly, what used to be 55 bushel beans is like 65, 70 bushel beans, and that's a big difference percent wise.
So, and obviously you're talking mostly about northern Illinois
Yeah,
down to
that's right.
central. And so, do you know, like, when I think about Nebraska, I think about all the irrigated stuff. Is that still almost all corn, or are they similarly splitting that up? Do you know?
It must be corn. We're going to plant 95.5 million acres of corn this year.
It's got to be
So,
somewhere.
yeah, I assume everything's corn. I assume the baseball fields are corn in Nebraska. I don't know.
Oh man. Um, so what are yeah, I mean, how did people feel about the planting intentions? Like, what was the reaction to that?
Uh, you know, that was a shocking number. Shocking. It was in line with expectations. So we knew we were headed this way, right?
Sure.
But it's a gigantic number.
Yeah.
And when we have that number, suddenly trendline yield isn't so important in the US, right? We don't have to maintain this trendline yield to meet the needs on corn. And that really changes things big time. So what we saw, one, more volatility just instantly back into the corn market, right? Because everybody's
Mhm.
saying like, are we going to actually have these acres? Are we not going to have these acres? And then, I'm looking at returns for guys, and I track the corn soybean ratio all the time, right? So typically, corn soybean ratio 2.5 is kind of the norm. So November soybeans divided by December corn.
Well, now wait a minute. Hold on. Before we go into that, are you anchored to 2005, Rodney?
I
Is it
don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, it holds up. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. Corn soybean ratio has been hanging out at like 2.2, right? Versus
because that was
2.5.
the number. That's what I was going to say was 2.2. 2.5 seemed big to me. Sorry, you were going to explain what corn soybean ratio is, and you should do that before we.
No, that's all right. Yeah. So what it is, it's November soybeans of the new crop divided by December corn of the new crop
November soybean what?
futures. Sorry. November soybean futures divided by December corn futures. Uh, anyway, I'm used to, and again, maybe that's a 2005 number, but like a 2.5 ratio. So, when we were like back before that planning intentions report, we were running at like a 2.2. So beans were really undervalued versus corn. And I was seeing that in guys' budgets, right? So as you mentioned, U of I or Farm Doc says we got a
Hmm.
loss on corn. True for most farms. Um, the loss is even bigger on soybeans
Mm.
at current values. So that tells me this corn soybean ratio thing still works, right? Because there wasn't a return on those beans. So the interesting thing about that is you start looking at planting corn versus beans. Everybody thinks there's going to be a gigantic corn crop. That's worth more money. I mean, guys will tend to switch to that corn crop, right? And sell it if they can.
So I will say that's counterintuitive to me. So there's going to be a gigantic corn crop. So I understand that if there's a lot of corn, the
Yes.
total value of corn goes up. But for an individual bushel, I would expect it to go down and things look worse. And so I might switch to beans given.
Yeah, dude, I would love to dive into that. So you're betting on the come in that situation, right? If you switch to beans. I think what a lot of guys are did is maybe switch, and honestly, dude, people don't switch like 30% of their crop, right? It's like,
Right.
I'm gonna plant an 80 in corn that I thought was gonna be beans or whatever. Um, and then hopefully if they do that, they are making a sale or hedging their bets somehow, right? To
Hmm.
protect that. But I'm with you. I think, definitely potentially, especially given planting progress as good as it is, I would expect that corn soybean ratio to bounce back closer to like a 2.5. And, that plays out a couple different ways. So one, I just did the math the other day. D's corn at like, it was like 450 when I did it. I think a 2.5 ratio, you can probably do that math in your head, but it's like 1150 beans, right?
Hmm.
And we were trading like 1020. We were a buck 20 off of where we should be given a normal corn soybean ratio. So I'm hoping we bounce back into scenarios like that.
There was a period of time where we played with a product that would allow somebody to not change their crop, but give them the price exposure to changing their crop. Um,
You've been doing this a similar thing, right?
yeah,
You and
we
adding a
cause, well
ratio.
because we were having that same conversation. I can't remember but the ratio is out of whack. And I feel like normally it gets more extreme where the beans get too cheap. More
Yes.
often than you see corn get too cheap relative to beans. Um, if there is a mean, I I think corn has a harder time breaking out as or it stays strong, I guess.
Corn stayed strong. You're saying corn is stronger relative to beans if it's not normal.
If it's not normal, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think part of that, is driven by ethanol demand and, like again, I think we're definitely anchoring back to 2005 here where,
Yeah.
suddenly that corn soybean ratio got way out of whack, which by the way, I distinctly remember 94 million acres of corn being planted. It was, outside of the possibility. We were limit down that day, the day they announced it. And, yeah, we're a million bushels more, million and a half acres more than that this year. So look out.
So, I yeah, it man, that feels like a lot. Well, because it is a lot.
Yeah,
I'm I just even as a guy, I'm not pretty far removed from it these days. Like when I think about how expensive cattle is right now,
yeah,
and there's a bunch of people jumping into that haven't done it before. That feels like a bubble ready to burst,
sure.
and so that corn production seems, maybe like it's geared towards feeding those animals in a lot of ways. Well, obviously
Yeah.
it's geared towards feeding those animals, but I worry that that's all going to go hand in hand. Um, yeah. So you
Yeah,
got
so I think we have record usage on corn this year, and we're budgeting for record usage again next year. So the bubble is super interesting, Gabe. Like, sure, as long as that plays out, as long as our predictions are right, we'll probably have a relatively tight stocks to use ratio next year. But boy, you can change that around in a hurry.
so so then, I mean, are these the conversations you're having with your guys as you walk them through, like what the plan is
Yeah.
this year?
So to be clear, this week we're not having conversations because they're
Right,
planning,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I
So
try
when
not.
you call them 2 weeks from now,
Yeah, when we're talking, yeah, I mean, mostly what we talk about is that profitability, right? I try to anything I can do to get back to profitability, is really helpful in having that conversation. I think we've talked before where I, is 450 a good price for corn? I don't know. Like that's like one variable in a bunch of different things, right? Yield matters, cost production matters, all those things. So that's why anything I can do to get them back to, hey, what is the actual revenue per acre that we're able to generate on this price? Now it's easier to make a decision. And frankly, Gabe, none of those prices equal a price that anyone is remotely excited about today. Farm returns are just depressed right now. You know.
yeah,
That makes
well,
it tough.
yeah, it's so so you're having conversations about losses per acre,
In a lot of cases, yeah. Or, there's the whole thing, the market doesn't care what your cost of production
right?
is,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I'm actually not 100% sure that's true, but I get that that is like mostly true, right? It doesn't have to get to a point where you're profitable. Although I would argue if it doesn't, maybe the corn doesn't get planted, right? And that's a problem.
Well, yeah, yeah. So the market, right, as a beast, does
Yeah,
not care about you and your
right.
problems. Um, but it will. The reason that cost of production matters is what you just said. Like the corn won't get planted, and so I mean, the fundamental view of a capitalist is that it will, while the market doesn't care, what it is trying to find is what's the right price, and the right
Exactly.
price is a high enough price that the product can be made profitably, that people have the incentive to do it.
Yeah.
And so it being a loser is not the right incentive. Uh, and so on the whole, it that being it people should stop growing crop, right? Or corn. Obviously, that's a really it's really easy for me to sit here and go, yeah,
Yeah.
people should grow less corn.
Not gonna
Um,
happen.
not gonna
But
happen. Not gonna
yeah, I
happen
mean
on a
the main
dime. But like,
yeah.
so I don't know how much you worked with the guys down south, but like you said, nobody's going to change 30% of their production here. I will tell you what, down there they will. Like
Yeah, for sure.
that
That's it.
was, and when I say down south, I mean southern U.S. Um, that's the biggest distinction to me is how comfortable those farmers are changing what they're growing than the guys in the north,
Yeah, that's right.
because they'll switch on a dime to cotton and or peanuts for crying out loud.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Yeah.
sometimes, but they're just mentally they're just far more comfortable switching out what they're doing and planting something else.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Gabe. And I think, we mentioned earlier about the you would plant more beans, right? Assuming this
I'm
thing.
asking the question.
No, I know. And hey, I think that makes sense. I think Illinois farmers, like guys I deal with every day, probably don't think about the fact that people will change half their crop, right? Like we
Mm,
just that wouldn't happen around here. So it feels a little distant, but it's a reality for sure. Like you talk Western United States, they just won't plant anything, right?
mm,
Like if the returns aren't there, they won't plant anything. That sounds crazy to a guy staring out my window looking at a bunch of cornfields here, right? Like that's going to get planted whether there's profit or not, 100%. Any given year, right? That's the other thing is it's it's an operation. Year to year is really, really important, but it's like how years compound that really matters. There's definitely guys that have run good corn operations or good operations that have had a year or multiple years where they've actually lost money and then made that up in some other year and built back up that equity. So
mm,
that's what's weird. I mean, a lot of the guys I'm talking to, we're talking about, hey, how do we protect against less loss on the
mhm.
farm, right? Like that they've internalized that.
So what are some of the things that they think or you think about when you're in that mindset? How do you protect against less loss?
Yeah, so one for me, it really comes down to understanding costs, right? So the thing, and man, I made a career, Gabe, out of like just going to guys and being like, how much does it cost you to plant corn? Cool. How many acres or how many bushels per acre are you gonna raise? Cool. Divide that out. This is your break even. And it sounds dumb, but it was really helpful because it puts a number in front of you and it's like, oh, now I can, decide if that's enough money for me or whatever. Where up until you do that, it's just a bunch of crazy numbers floating around in your mind that aren't really related. This is how my brain works anyway. So one of the things, so I talk guys through that, right? Which is you would think very simple. It's more complicated than it should be in a lot of ways. Um, but then two, the thing I'm pressing on them right now is yield, right? Like, hey, you know, don't tell me we're gonna like don't do the math based on your crop insurance APH
Mm,
if you always raise more than your crop insurance, right?
right.
So the biggest mistake I've seen in my career that guys make is being too conservative on their bushels,
Hmm.
which makes them less likely to sell grain when because there's less profit on paper. So they undersell and then they raise 10% more or 20% more than they budgeted for. So they have more bushels that they're making less money on, right? That is actually the biggest mistake I've seen.
Now that's a I don't think that's an insight you've shared with me before. Where and I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna say it back to make sure I heard. So somebody's doing the math on what they think they're going to produce, looking at the current market and saying, okay, here's my break even. The problem is when they see a number, however they're doing the math, when they see a number that looks like a loser, they won't execute a sale.
It's harder to execute a sale. And I'm sure you would go on for a long time about how it's hard to lock in a loss,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. That's. I mean, so you see it in so seen it exactly what you're saying. It happens in equities all the time, right? If somebody's
Mm.
listening who trades uh, retail stocks, uh, if you've bought into something and it goes down, it's really hard to sell it
Sure.
because you're hoping that it's going to go back up,
Yeah.
and you haven't actually lost it until you sell it.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and
right.
so making that decision is painful. That's real
Yeah.
pain.
That's right. Yeah, and the mindset that a lot of guys have is they don't want to oversell. They've either been in a situation where they've oversold, which are not pretty, but they are manageable, especially with crop insurance. Or they, know somebody that lost the farm because they were, trading futures. Uh, yeah, all right, maybe. But if you're actually hedging, right?
Right.
Uh, I think your biggest risk is not selling, right? So the other thing I try to telling farmers, you talked about a guy, things change when once you buy a stock because, now you own it. These farmers, they're long corn for the rest of their life, right? Like I, like, I don't have a farm, I don't own a farm, but if I did, I hope to be long corn for like another 50 years, right?
So,
Um,
are there any tricks you use? Not tricks, but is there anything you do to help people get in that mindset where they recognize that, like, by pricing it, you're actually going market neutral as opposed to being
Yeah.
long?
So one thing I do is I talk about risk exposure. So farmers tend to like to talk about percent sold,
Mm-hmm.
right? So and then even percent sold can get a little cloudy because if I sold on a basis contract, it's like doesn't really protect me at all or very little. So one of the things I've done is flip that. So now I talk about percent exposure. So instead of saying, hey, you're 20% sold on corn, I say, hey, you're 80% sold again on the future, or you're 80% exposed against the future of the movement, right?
Yeah.
And when you start to say like, hey, just like it's cool, that's fine, but if the market goes down 10 cents, you're going to lose eight across your whole production. It just shifts it just a little bit. These
Yeah.
guys get it. Like I'm not that's the other thing. It's
Well,
not like rocket science, but
well, I
it's
think for most of us, it takes. It's not necessarily intuitive, right? Like, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? We're as humans, we're not geared for financial markets, and so it we shouldn't expect anybody to, like, no matter how smart they are, to figure that out necessarily on their own or figure out the right way to help themselves frame it. And I mean, I think about it as a trader. When you trade options, you one of the risks you have is a relative exposure to the market. Kind of exactly what you're saying, right? Like, this will move 80% of the
yes.
market of the underlying price.
Yeah.
And so today, that's a really comfortable and natural place for me to look at that risk. I'm like, yeah, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But it's funny, you've taken that same concept and applied it. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that is the right way to do it. That's probably the right frame. Thinking about as percent sold is broken to your,
It's backwards. It
yeah.
just doesn't help that much, right? And then the other thing I'd like to do, if anybody is working with me, they'll see me talk about 2 years out, even if I don't care about 2 years out, right? Like, no way, given today, no way. And this is not advice, by the way, to anybody, but like me, Rodney, as a farmer, if I was raising corn, I would not be selling D's 26 corn at 461, right? Versus D's 25 here, right? It's not worth it. Um, but I do like to show them, hey, you're, you know, 60% exposed in your D's 25 crop and you're 100% exposed in your D's 26 crop. I think that makes it easier to be like, oh, if I shoot my shot in 25 at a profitable level, I've got another shot in 26. So those are the little things I try to
You're a peddler of hope, Rodney.
do. I just think man, me and you have talked about it, Gabe. The least risky thing a farmer can do is sell. Just like
Yeah.
because he's long all the
Well, by
time.
definition, yeah, right? Like,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, that's funny. So, okay, is there? So let's take a step back. So, like you said, nobody's going to talk to you today. Nobody's pricing any crop right now. But what? Oh, like 30 days from now. So that'd put us June
Yeah.
1,
Yeah.
roughly. What? like where should people want to be at that point? Like
Yeah.
what are they thinking about?
So we're coming into what is tends to be like a seasonal opportunity to price grain, right? So we tend to see some rally, and we have seen some rally during planting season. Uh, we tend to have some issues, and the market gets nervous in May at some point,
Hmm.
right? And then
Crop's
we
all gonna
tend to,
die.
yeah, crop dies 3 times is what they used to say. So, and then in, June or July, we tend to see some opportunities. So what I'm telling guys today, when I'm literally talking to guys about protecting against losses of equity on my farm, those are the literal like
Mhm.
conversations I'm having. Cool, that sucks. Man, I would love to take that off your plate, right? Uh, if we do see a rally in May or June, right, that leads us to these profitable levels, I think this year of all years, it should be, we'll see, it should be easier to lock in those prices given the fact that they're very worried about losing equity in the farm, right? Um, that being said, I'm sure it'll come up when we're putting in new highs on corn. We don't tend to be feeling really good about the corn in the field, right? So that goes against you. But again, it goes back to my thing that I just say like the biggest mistake I see farmers make over the last few years is underestimating how much grain they're going to raise,
Yeah.
right? So we'll be pushing them, challenging them. My job is to challenge these guys, Gabe. Like that's very much how I view my job. I do it because I want to see them be profitable. I do it because I'm a grain nerd. I love grain. Like it's a tough business. It's a hard business, man. People run from the grain business. Um, Not me. I run at it. So I don't know why.
You heard it here first. Roddy's a first responder for grain markets.
That's right.
I
That's right.
love that. We'll get you a high vis vest and a helmet.
It's in my blood. It's in my blood.
Um, what else is going on? All right, we're planting, we're doing that kind of stuff. Is there anything? Are there any? I mean, we could talk about tariffs, but I feel like there's probably 8 billion people talking about tariffs. Is there? Are there any stories that you're thinking about that maybe are a layer or two down, or maybe a little more removed?
So I don't know if we should get into them now. I haven't checked the time here, Gabe, but I will say there's a few things I came that I thought maybe we could talk about. So one, I saw a post on Facebook, which you should not be checking Facebook for market advice for
No.
sure. But I saw a post that really revved me up the other day. The guy said, the worst investment you can make in your farm in the last 30 years is on-farm storage, which is the craziest statement in the world. And I have lots to say about what's going on there.
That's a fascinating position.
And I know what he's saying. I think I would love to talk to you about that. Yeah. And then the other one I want to talk like kind of a hot take here is I've been thinking a lot about crop insurance lately. I've been focused on crop insurance because of this revenue protection thing. And I think we always used to talk about crop insurance as a put option,
Hmm.
right? So protects you in the case of a loss. Um, I think we're not doing farmers a favor by talking about it as a put option. I think instead we should be talking about it as a call option, right? And the reason I say that is if I already have a put on, I don't need to do anything. I'm protected, right?
Hmm.
That strategy has not worked out for farmers much in the past. The alternative here is because of the harvest adjustment for crop insurance, if the price is higher in October than it is in, I think, February, um, my insurance guarantee goes up with that price, right? So to me, it's like, hey, actually, you could get really aggressive on your sales because you already have this call option protecting you in the case of a market going higher.
Yeah, I feel like let's talk about that next time. That
Yeah, we could dig into that one. I think
I think
that's an
that's a good
important
one.
concept, and I'd love to hear, what you think about positioning it that way, right?
Yeah. I'm already racing on a little bit, so I'm gonna
Yeah, good.
cut myself off there. But let's talk about that next time. What what's the deal with the bin thing? Like I
Mhm.
so I was at Cargill when we did Cargill's on-farm storage
Yeah,
program.
yeah.
I think I'm far enough removed now where I can share some stuff. So like from that felt like an amazing program that we offered. Been so for people that weren't around then or didn't know the program, people were able to buy a discounted bin. So it was basically Cargill negotiated some lower prices in return for commitments to deliver basically the grain that bin was going to hold to Cargill, and then you could finance it uh, by using back then what was called premium offers. And so that was an agreement to sell corn to Cargill with a futures price that if the market was at above that price on a certain date, that was the futures price of that corn.
Yeah. So for people that don't remember that, you could think that worked almost the same as like accumulators are working today on double ups, premium offers, short calls. Like that's not exactly what it was, but that's the type of thing. Just want to make sure. Yep.
And so I know at the time it helped out Cargill quite a bit in that it secured grain coming to their facilities. So that was one for them. The farmers generally seemed pretty thrilled about what was,
Yeah.
what penciled as a pretty good deal in terms of getting storage. So even though you were bringing the grain to Cargill, you had a lot more control over basis
Yeah.
in terms of when you wanted to bring it in. And yeah, and the bin dealer I think had mixed feelings about it because there's some tricky stuff in the bin space
Yeah.
around how that dealership structure works. But at the same time, they moved a lot of steel.
Yep.
Um, Now, as time went on, after that program went away, I know there was a lot of frustration out of the Cargill side because they were upset that they gave up all that control over
Yeah.
delivery.
That's right.
um, and so that was kind of funny. But so from that perspective, it always looked to me like from a farmer perspective, having some amount of control over your crop in terms of delivering it and timing, if you're disciplined about things, that was
Yeah.
a pretty strong win. So I'm curious, like what's the argument against it?
Oh, it's 100% that, hey, I put the corn in the bin in October and it's $4 and I sell it for 350 in July. That is
Okay,
100% what he's
that's it.
talking about,
Okay,
right? Yeah. So, but dude, I think it brings up a good point. If you think the future, if you think the market's going to go higher, right? That is not a reason to store corn. That's like a
right,
completely different decision
yeah,
because we can manage price risk in 1,000 different ways, right? That was my whole thing.
okay,
And carries in markets, especially if we're going to raise 95.5 million acres of corn, I would expect some large carries in the futures market. Interest costs are going up, so we better take advantage of those, carries. And I think the farmer can be well served to figure out how to lock in those carries, take better, and take them when when it looks good.
yeah, yeah. Well, that I mean that's it, well, and I think it's probably just worth reiterating. Generally, when you and I talk about the market, we're actually just talking about the futures component
Yeah, right.
of that
Yeah,
corn or bean price, not the cash price.
that's right.
Um, but we're sensitive to the cash price too. That's why the bin there's also the logistical advantages that come from that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's funny to hear that Cargill was upset about that. I mean, I get it. My gut would have said that most of the guys that put up those grain bins, that grain didn't go to the co-op, right? Co-op buys up a lot of those bushels that don't have a home in the fall
mhm,
because companies like Cargill in a lot of places aren't well suited to take fall corn, right? Like around
right.
here, they just don't. Um, so I would think getting them in a bin actually gave them an opportunity to buy them in later years or later in the year that they wouldn't have had.
I mean, you know how the vibe I get is if you've ever had like a contractor come to your house and they'll
Yeah.
tell you everything the last contractor did was horrible.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of and I'm sure there what and so I was not cool, like it's something that somebody told me that somebody told me, so
Yeah.
it was should make really clear, as far as I know, that's not an official Cargill
It
position
was on
on
the
this.
website.
but but I'm sure there are moments where individuals and specific locations have felt frustration because there was a lot of storage around them and they needed corn and they felt like they weren't in a great, in the same negotiating position they would have been 15 years prior. Like
That's right.
that, totally. Yeah. I mean, that's the downside of that. I, but I think in, you know, obviously the origination space has evolved quite a bit from when we first
Yep.
started, when there was I would say, a stronger focus on, especially out of Cargill, building farmer partnerships.
Yep.
Like that was new. That idea was new at that time,
Yep.
and that longer term view let us do a whole bunch of things that I think were getting mutually beneficial and had long term views. And I bet if in the places where that's still that partnership is really looked at as a partnership, and farmers are looked at genuinely as customers, that grain's still coming to Cargill, right? Like,
Yeah,
because every time
exactly.
you walk
Right.
by it, like that's a bin that Cargill helped me put up. Like,
That's right. Yeah.
not that they're in love or anything, but it, that's a good vibe.
Yeah, I agree. And man, I'll tell you, Gabe, the one thing I don't like about the ag business these days is I think we're generally drifting away from that partnership model with farmers. Um, margins are tight in the commercial space as well as the farmer. Like typically, when the farmer's not making money, neither is the commercial.
Hmm.
And vice versa. So when the farmer's making money, typically the commercial's making money. But those tight budgets just have it. They're less likely to invest in guys and gals that are on farms talking about risk management and really getting to know the nitty gritty of a guy's operation
It's probably a topic for another
for sure.
call.
Yes.
Is kind of understanding short term, long term views, and
Yeah.
why some of those things have changed how they have. Um, uh, okay. Well, is there anything else you want to hit on today?
No, I think we wrap it up today, Gabe.
All right. I will.
Episode 1
Episode one.
in the can.
Book it.